Between ruin and resolve, my ex-husband's regret. Chapter 1: The Silence After Goodbye. The day Michael walked out, the world didn't crumble. It just got quieter. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest like a weight. No arguments, no pleading. Just the soft sound of the front door clicking shut and the echo of footsteps down the hallway. He didn't slam it. He never needed to. His exits were always silent and always final. I stood in the kitchen, still holding a cup of tea I had made for him. Earl Grey. 2 sugars, no milk, exactly how he liked it, even when we were fighting. I stared at the steam rising from it, like the last bit of warmth left in our marriage. I don't remember how long I stood there. Minutes? Hours? Time loses meaning when you're trying to figure out if this is really the end, if this is the moment your life splits in two, the before and the after. We weren't always like this. There were years when Michael was my best friend, the man who made me laugh until I cried, who kissed my forehead when I couldn't sleep, who once held my hand through the loss of our first pregnancy. But life doesn't keep love alive just because it once existed. Love dies slowly, not from anger, but neglect. It wasn't another woman. It wasn't even one moment. It was hundreds of little things. Missed texts, short tempers, work that always came first, birthdays spent apart. We stopped looking at each other across the dinner table. We stopped asking the important questions. Are you okay? Or what do you need? Instead, we just existed, side by side, but never together. That night, after he left, I sat on the living room floor, still in the sweater he gave me 3 Christmases ago, and finally let myself cry. Not just for the marriage that had ended, but for the woman I had lost somewhere along the way. The version of me who used to believe in lasting love. I didn't know it then, but Michael would come back. Not to resume what we had, that part was over, but to face what we broke. And somewhere in the ruins, we would both find a kind of truth we hadn't dared to speak. The first morning without him was harder than the night before. Nights are made for crying. They welcome heartbreak like an old friend. But mornings demand function, movement, clarity, none of which I had. I woke up tangled in cold sheets that smelled like his cologne, not strongly, just enough to make me wish I hadn't washed his t-shirts last week. The side of the bed he used to sleep on was untouched. I didn't cross the line that divided us, even in sleep. I made coffee, but didn't drink it. I opened the curtains, but didn't notice the light. My body was moving through routines, but my mind was still stuck in the doorway where he'd stood. Not with rage, not with tears, but with a tiredness I didn't recognize in him until it was too late. When did we stop trying? The house was too quiet. Even the creaks in the floor felt unfamiliar now, as if they belonged to someone else's home. I wandered from room to room like a stranger in my own life. The photos on the wall mocked me, smiling moments frozen in time that had nothing to do with reality anymore. I reached up to take one down, my fingers trembling, but I couldn't do it. Not yet. Instead, I sat on the floor of our bedroom. No, my bedroom now. And opened the drawer he used to keep his watches in. It was empty. Every item gone, except for one, a note I hadn't noticed the night before. Folded once, clean lines, no tears or stains. Just his handwriting, familiar and devastating. I don't know how to fix this, so I'm stepping back. Maybe we were never meant to fix it. Maybe we both deserve a version of peace we couldn't give each other. Michael. I read it twice, then a third time. There was no bitterness in his words. Just surrender. It stung more than a fight ever could. The thing about silence is that it gives you space to hear everything you've ignored. Regrets, questions, truths you buried beneath compromise. And now they were all screaming. But the worst part? Even in his absence, I didn't hate him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just hated the way we let go. Not with fire, but with quiet. And somewhere in that silence, I knew this wasn't the last I'd hear from him. Things I never said out loud. Grief doesn't always arrive in tears. Sometimes it looks like organizing drawers, folding laundry that doesn't belong to anyone anymore, or suddenly deciding to clean the baseboards at 3 a.m. That was me. In sweatpants, hair tied back, scrubbing a life I no longer recognized. I wasn't trying to erase him. I was trying to find the version of myself that existed before him. The one who decorated this house with soft beige curtains and lavender candles, not because he liked them, but because I did. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten how to want things for myself. I found his old hoodie in the linen closet, the one he used to wear on rainy Sundays while we watched old movies and ate cereal straight from the box. It still smelled faintly like cedarwood and him. I hugged it to my chest and sank to the floor, whispering things I never said when it mattered. I needed you to ask me how I was. I needed you to stay when I shut down. I needed you to fight for me, for us. The hoodie didn't answer. It never could. But I said the words anyway, because I never got the chance to say them when he was standing in front of me. Maybe I was afraid they'd sound too needy, or maybe I thought he should just know. That was one of our fatal mistakes. Assuming love was enough to explain everything. That silence could replace effort. That time would fix what effort didn't. I pulled myself up eventually, because I had to. I showered. I changed. I even went out to buy groceries. But I skipped the cereal aisle. I wasn't ready for that yet. Later that night, I sat by the window, watching cars pass by and wondering if he missed me. If he thought about the way I used to make his coffee exactly how he liked it, or how I always sang along to the wrong lyrics and pretended I knew them. If he was sleeping peacefully, or if his silence was as loud as mine. The hoodie sat folded at the foot of my bed, a soft reminder of the things we built and broke. And as I drifted into sleep, I kept hearing my own voice repeating one quiet, persistent thought. Why didn't you fight for me? I didn't expect. It had been 8 days. Not that I was counting. I told myself I wouldn't check my phone every hour. I told myself I wouldn't reread his note or scroll through old texts, looking for clues of where things went wrong. But healing is never clean. It's messy, desperate, and often humiliating. And sometimes it shows up at 10:42 p.m., in the form of a phone call you weren't ready for. His name lit up my screen. Michael. Still saved with no heart, no emojis. Just his name. Simple. Final. I stared at it for too long. My thumb hovered over the screen, unsure whether to answer or let it ring into memory. Part of me wanted to let him feel the silence I'd been living in. The other part still craved the sound of his voice like oxygen. I answered on the 4th ring. Hello? My voice cracked like it hadn't been used in years. There was a pause. Then his voice, low and hesitant. Hey. That one word undid me. We didn't jump into apologies or explanations. There were no fireworks. Just two people who used to know each other better than anyone, now fumbling through the fog of distance. I didn't think you'd answer, he said softly. I didn't think you'd call. Another pause. I've been thinking, he admitted. About everything. About how I left. About how I should have stayed and talked instead of walking out. I closed my eyes. Then why didn't you? His sigh traveled through the phone, heavy and real. Because I was tired. Tired of pretending we were okay. Tired of feeling like a guest in my own home. And I didn't know how to tell you that without breaking you. You broke me anyway. I know. Those 2 words. I know. They settled like dust over everything unspoken between us. I didn't call to fix anything tonight. Wah, he added. I just wanted to hear your voice. I didn't know what to say, so I let silence be the response. But for once it didn't feel like a wall. It felt like acknowledgement. When we hung up, I sat in bed staring at the ceiling. No crying, no screaming, just quiet. But it was different this time. Because now I knew something I hadn't known the day he left. He regretted it. And regret is where resolve begins. Chapter 5. The memory that broke me. Grief has a funny way of playing tricks on the mind. One moment, you're folding towels. The next, you're back in a memory so vivid, it feels like you're living it all over again. That happened to me the morning after the call. I found the photo album we made after our 2nd anniversary. We'd spent a week on the coast, a modest trip, but one of the happiest times in our marriage. Back then, we took pictures of everything. Lighthouses, bare feet in the sand, half-eaten slices of lemon pie. We laughed at things no one else would find funny. And we promised we'd always come back. I ran my hand over the plastic sleeve of one picture. Michael smiling at me from behind a crooked pair of sunglasses, his arm around my shoulders, his eyes crinkling the way they did only when he was genuinely happy. That image gutted me more than his absence ever could. Because that man, the one in the photo, he loved me. Not perfectly, but truly. And somewhere along the way, we let life bury that version of ourselves. Bills. Work, misunderstandings that turned into resentments. We let the weight of survival crush the joy out of us. I clutched the album to my chest and cried. Not soft, pretty tears. Ugly, racking sobs that came from the deepest parts of me. The part that still wanted to believe love could be enough. The part that was furious it hadn't been. When the crying stopped, I lay there, listening to the stillness of the house, to the ticking of the clock on the wall, to my own breath slowing down. And then I said it, out loud, to the empty room. I still love you. There was no reply, just the weight of truth hanging in the air. But I didn't say it to get him back. I said it because it was real. Because healing, I was starting to learn, doesn't begin when the pain ends. It begins when you're brave enough to face it. And that day, I was brave. Even if just for a moment. Chapter 6, the space between us. There's a strange rhythm that comes after a breakup. A pause between the old world and whatever comes next. A space where you're not quite grieving anymore, but not healed either. That's where I was now. Michael hadn't called again. I hadn't reached out either. We were orbiting each other in silence. Not because we were angry, but because we didn't know how to be anything else. I kept busy. I returned to work, smiled when I had to, replied to texts with heart emojis I didn't feel. I told my friends I was fine. They nodded like they believed me, but their eyes lingered too long. Their hugs lasted too much. Everyone knew. Everyone but him. One afternoon, while organizing a pile of forgotten paperwork in the spare room, the room we once planned to turn into a nursery, I found the paint swatches we'd picked out 2 years ago. Mint green, soft gray, warm ivory. I sat there on the floor, holding those tiny samples, and felt the ache of the life we almost had. We had talked about children, names, traditions we'd start, books we'd read aloud. I had wanted a girl, he had wanted twins, and somewhere between the wanting and the waiting, we just lost the dream. I didn't cry this time. I just sat there and let the memories pass through me, like wind through an open window. I realized something then. The hardest part wasn't that we ended. It was that we ended quietly. No dramatic betrayal, no final blowout, just small daily choices that pushed us further apart. Work calls during dinner, shrugging off each other's sadness, replacing affection with routine. And by the time we noticed how far we drifted, it felt like too much effort to swim back. But now, in this space between the past and the future, I was beginning to ask myself a question I hadn't dared to before. If he came back, would I want him to? The answer wasn't as clear as I thought it would be. And maybe that was the beginning of my own resolve, his voice in the doorway. It was a Sunday when he showed up. I hadn't expected it, wasn't dressed for it, emotionally or otherwise. I was in leggings and a sweatshirt that still had flour from the banana bread I'd attempted to make that morning. Hair in a loose bun, face bare, heart even barer. The doorbell rang once. I froze. No one rings my bell unannounced. Not anymore. I peeked through the window and saw him, Michael. Hands in his pockets, head slightly down, like a boy sent to apologize. I opened the door, not knowing why. Maybe because curiosity outweighed bitterness, or maybe because part of me had been waiting for this. For him, he said. That voice again. Calm, familiar. Still full of the ache I hadn't been able to shake. I didn't move aside. Why are you here? I didn't know who else to be honest with, and I don't think I can carry it alone anymore. That stopped me. He looked tired. Not just in the way of sleepless nights, but like someone who had finally faced himself and didn't like what he saw. I've been talking to someone, he said quickly, like he'd rehearsed the words. A therapist. I thought I was just angry at us, but it turns out I've been angry at myself for longer than I knew. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, but not closed off. And you came here to confess? No, he said. I came to thank you. That threw me off balance. For what? For loving me, even when I didn't know how to be loved. For staying longer than you should have. And for letting me go when I wasn't brave enough to fix it. The breeze picked up behind him. It felt like the world itself was listening. I didn't know what to say. Not yet. Not with all that still sat between us, unhealed and unspoken. But I stepped aside, not to let him in, just to sit with him on the porch. And in that moment, there was no promise of reconciliation. No dramatic music or sudden embrace. Just a quiet beginning. Because sometimes healing starts with sitting in the same silence that once tore you apart. And choosing this time to listen. Chapter 8, Echoes Over Coffee. The next morning, he was still there. Not in my bed. Not in my house. Just in town, staying at a motel a few streets away. We didn't speak much after our porch conversation, but it wasn't awkward. It was deliberate, careful, like we were learning how to be around each other again without all the old patterns slipping back in. He texted just after sunrise. Coffee? Just talk. I hesitated, phone in hand, thumb hovering. Then I typed, "Same place?" He replied with a thumbs up emoji, the most casual response to the most fragile situation. We met at the corner cafe where we used to sit every Saturday. The staff had changed. The furniture hadn't. I wondered if they remembered us, the couple who used to laugh too loudly, who debated about novels and took turns adding honey to each other's drinks. He was already seated when I walked in. He stood when he saw me, a habit he'd never dropped, even in the worst days. And for a moment, we were just two people meeting for coffee. "How's the banana bread?" he asked, smiling lightly. "You remembered." Hard to forget something that ended with a smoke alarm. I chuckled. It wasn't forced. He stirred his coffee slowly, eyes watching the swirl. "I've been thinking about the quiet." "What about it?" It wasn't just the absence of noise or of fighting. It was the absence of trying, of choosing each other when it wasn't convenient. I nodded. We both stopped choosing. He looked up, eyes more tired than yesterday. "Yeah." There were a dozen things I could have said, about hurt, about time, about how some breaks are too deep to glue back together. But instead, I asked, "Why now?" He didn't hesitate. "Because I finally stopped running. And when I did, the only place I wanted to go back to was where I lost you." The weight of that hit differently. It wasn't just regret anymore. It was awareness. "Michael," I said gently, "I'm not who I was then. I'm trying to figure out who I am now." "Me too," he said. "Maybe we can figure it out, near each other. No promises, just honesty." It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a plea, just 2 cups of coffee and a willingness to speak truths without dressing them up. As we sipped in silence, I realized something. Sometimes, the softest conversations carry the loudest healing. Chapter 9. Letters Never Sent. Later that evening, I found myself opening the box I'd kept hidden on the top shelf of my closet. It was covered in old receipts and a faded scarf I hadn't worn in years, the kind of camouflage you use to forget things that once meant too much. Inside were letters. All the ones I wrote but never sent. Some were angry, jagged words scrawled across crumpled pages in the middle of teary nights. Others were soft, confused, even hopeful. A few had watermarks from where tears had blurred the ink. I sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor and read them one by one. One from the week after he moved out. "I saw your socks still in the drawer and broke down. Not because I missed the socks, but because I missed the ordinary way you used to leave them there." Another from a month later. "I thought I'd hate you by now, but instead, I hate how I still check my phone hoping you'll reach out." There was one I barely remembered writing, dated almost a year after the divorce was final. "I'm starting to heal. I can breathe again without the weight of waiting for you. I don't know if I want you back, or just want to be seen again by the one who used to know me best." I didn't cry. Not this time. I just read them like I was reading someone else's story. Someone who had loved, lost, and somehow survived. Then, without planning to, I grabbed a pen and wrote another. "Dear Michael, today felt different. Like maybe we're not trying to fix the past, but understand it. That matters. I don't know where this goes, but I do know I'm not scared of the silence anymore. Me, I didn't plan to give it to him, not yet. Maybe never. But for the first time, writing it wasn't about reaching him. It was about reaching me." Chapter 10. A walk through what was left. 2 days passed without another message. Not from anger, not from avoidance. Just space. And oddly, it felt okay. I spent the morning walking through the neighborhood trail behind our old apartment complex, the one lined with creaking wooden benches and wild daisies that bloomed in spring whether anyone noticed or not. We used to walk this trail often, back when silence between us still meant comfort. As I stepped onto the gravel path, I felt something shift inside me. Not a longing to go back, but a need to understand what pieces of myself I had left behind. I passed the place where we once argued about nothing. Pizza toppings, I think. And later laughed so hard about it we forgot why it started. I remembered the bench where he once kissed my forehead and told me, "We're better when we slow down." We never really learned how to do that. Midway through the walk, I heard a jogger approaching from behind. I stepped aside instinctively, but the voice that said, "Hey," stopped me in my tracks. It was him. Michael. He looked surprised too, slowing to a walk, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, catching his breath. I could say the same. We both laughed, a little too aware of the coincidence of his hat, a little unsure if it even was one. "You walk here often?" I asked, not really expecting an answer that mattered. He nodded. "Started again a few weeks ago. Feels like the only place I can think clearly." We walked together, slowly, wordlessly for a while, the kind of silence that didn't press down on us like before. It just existed, side by side. "Remember that night we got caught in the rain here?" he said suddenly. I smiled. "You tried to use your jacket to cover me, but ended up soaking both of us." "I'd still do it again," he said quietly. "Even knowing what I know now." The air between us stilled. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because I wasn't sure what mine would mean anymore. At the end of the trail, there was a fork. One path that looped back and another that led further into the woods. He looked at me. "Should we keep walking?" I looked at the path ahead, then at him. "Let's sit instead." So we did. On the same bench where years ago we dreamed of building a life. We didn't talk much more. We didn't need to. Sometimes, the most honest moments come when you stop trying to say the right thing and simply share the quiet, when memories don't hurt anymore. It surprised me how normal it started to feel. Seeing him now and then, hearing his voice without flinching, sitting beside him without the weight of what we used to be pressing against my ribs. We weren't anything yet. Not lovers. Not even friends, really. Just two people with a history trying not to rewrite it, but understand it better. One afternoon, I drove past our old apartment building. The curtains were different now. The flower box on the window was gone. A small child's tricycle sat on the porch, evidence of a new story unfolding inside those walls. It didn't sting. Not like before. It was a strange kind of freedom, to see the place that once held your whole life and feel nothing but peace. Later that night, Michael called. Just a short call. No heavy confessions. "I passed by the bookstore," he said. "The one where we used to hide in the poetry aisle." I smiled, curling up on my couch. "You mean the one you pretended to like just to impress me?" He chuckled. Busted. That was all. But it made me think. Maybe healing isn't a straight line. Maybe it's a slow circle that eventually brings you back to yourself, only softer. I remembered a memory that used to break me. The way he once watched me while I read, like the sound of my voice was something sacred. Back then, I was too insecure to believe it. I thought he'd grow bored, that I'd become background noise. Now I understood. He hadn't left because he didn't care. He left because neither of us knew how to carry the weight of our love. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and whispered to my reflection, "I forgive you." Not him, me. For staying too long. For not speaking sooner. For thinking love had to be painful to be real. And maybe in some way, that was the real beginning. Because when memories stop hurting, you start remembering who you were before the break. And that person? She was still here. Dinner with no labels. It started with a text. Dinner? No expectations. Just dinner. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. The old me would have dissected every word, looked for hidden meanings, questioned his motive, but now, I just wanted to see what honesty looked like over a shared plate of food. We met at a small Italian place we used to love. Not fancy, not loud, just familiar. He was already there when I arrived, seated at a table near the window. He stood when he saw me. Same habit, same nervous smile that tugged at memories I'd long stopped chasing. "You look good," he said. I didn't deflect it, didn't wave it away or laugh awkwardly. "Thanks," I replied. "So do you." The menu hadn't changed. I ordered the same thing I always used to, and he did too. Little anchors in a sea of change. Conversation was easy. We talked about work, about his nephew who just started school, about the neighbor's cat that somehow decided his motel room welcome mat was its new home. We didn't talk about us. Not directly. But it was there, between the lines, in the quiet glances, in the way his eyes softened when I laughed. Midway through the meal, he looked up from his plate and said, "You seem lighter." I nodded. "I think I am. You were always carrying everything, even the parts I should have held." There it was. Not an apology dressed in flowers, not a performance, just a sentence spoken plainly, like fact. I didn't rush to forgive him. He didn't ask for it. We just let the truth sit there, breathing with us. When the check came, he tried to pay. I insisted we split it. No rolls tonight, I said. Just 2 people. Dinner. That's it. He smiled, folding the receipt. That's enough for me. As we stood outside the restaurant under the soft orange glow of the streetlight, he didn't lean in. He didn't reach for my hand. He just looked at me like he saw me. Not the version of me he missed, but the one standing right there. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't wonder what we were. I just knew we were something. Not broken, not whole, but present. And that was more than enough. Chapter 13. Rain Between the Lines. A week passed before I saw him again. Not because either of us was avoiding the other. Life just moved the way it does when you stop forcing it. Slowly, then all at once. It rained that Thursday. Not a storm, just a quiet drizzle that made the city feel softer somehow. I had just finished work when I found myself outside the old library we used to visit. I hadn't planned on stopping there. I was just walking and thinking, something I did more of lately. He was there. Not inside. Just leaning against the brick wall, headphones in, staring up at the gray sky like it was telling him something he was finally ready to hear. I stopped a few feet away. Didn't expect to see you here, I said, echoing the words he'd once spoken to me. He pulled out one earbud and smiled. Guess the library still knows how to bring people together. We stood there for a minute, neither of us making a move to go in. Want to walk? He asked. Sure, I said. The rain was light enough not to matter. We didn't bother with umbrellas. Our shoes soaked through, our hair started to curl with dampness, but we didn't care. I used to hate rainy days, he said. You used to hate anything that made you slow down. He laughed. That's true. We reached a park bench and sat, wet and quiet. Across from us, 2 kids ran through puddles, their laughter so honest it almost hurt. Michael turned to me. Can I ask you something? I nodded. If I had come back sooner, would it have changed anything? I exhaled. The question was sharp but fair. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe, but I wasn't ready to be loved the way I needed to be. And you weren't ready to love that way. He looked down. I didn't know how to be enough for you. You didn't have to be everything, I whispered. Just present, just honest. The rain picked up slightly, but we stayed. Not because we were clinging to something old, but because we were letting it breathe, seeing what could exist without the weight of past expectations. I missed this, he said. I smiled faintly. The quiet? He looked at me. You. My heart didn't leap. It didn't ache. It just listened. And in that pause, that silence between the raindrops, I realized something simple and terrifying. I missed him too. But not the version I used to chase. This one, the one showing up without answers, without pride, this version might be worth getting to know again. Chapter 14, Old Photos, New Light. It started with a box. I had been cleaning out my closet, trying to make space for everything and nothing at once. A ritual I did every time my thoughts grew too loud. Tucked behind a stack of winter scarves and an unopened yoga mat was a box labeled in my handwriting. Us. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the morning sun streaming through the blinds in stripes of gold and shadow. I stared at it for a moment, unsure if I was ready to revisit the version of myself who packed it away. Inside were snapshots of smiles we used to wear before the silence, concert tickets, a map with pins from our road trip through the coast, a letter I had written but never given him, folded neatly and still sealed. I didn't open it. Some things were better left unread. There was one photo, though, that held me still. It was us, not dressed up or staged. Just a Tuesday afternoon, laughing in the kitchen, flour on my cheek, his arms wrapped around me like the world couldn't touch us there. I studied my face. That woman wasn't naive. She was in love. And love, I was learning, didn't make you weak. It made you honest. Even when it broke. I texted Michael, "Do you remember that photo in the kitchen? The one we took when the pie exploded?" He replied within minutes. "You mean when you forgot the sugar and blamed the oven?" I laughed aloud. Alone, but not lonely. He added, "You had flour on your nose. I thought you looked like magic." We didn't plan to meet that day, but we did. I brought the photo. He brought coffee. We sat on the same park bench from the rainy day, and I handed it to him. "I used to think keeping these was a form of holding on," I said. "Now I think it's okay to remember, even the soft parts." He nodded, quiet. That day, I wanted to tell you I loved you. I just didn't know how to say it without ruining it. I looked at him. You did tell me. Every time you held on, even when it got hard. We didn't kiss. We didn't make promises. But we looked at each other with the clarity that comes from finally seeing the whole picture. Not just the pain, but the pieces that still glowed with something real. Sometimes healing means revisiting the past, but only to bring back the parts that deserve a place in your future. Chapter 15. A window left open. The morning after our meeting in the park, I left the kitchen window open. Not by mistake. It was a habit I had unlearned after the divorce. That window used to be his favorite. He said the breeze that came through it made the whole apartment feel less like a cage and more like a place to breathe. I used to leave it cracked on purpose, just for him. After he left, I kept it shut tight. Until that day. It was early. The air was crisp with a hint of spring, the kind that makes the world feel like it's trying again. I sipped my tea, wrapped in my old robe, watching the curtain dance with the wind. It reminded me of mornings we shared in silence, not because we were angry, but because we were content. Later, as I headed to the market, I passed by the community board and saw a flyer advertising a photography exhibit downtown, Moments Between Words. I sent him a photo of the flyer. This sounds like something you'd like? Only if you come with me. So we went. The gallery was small, but it held something intimate. Each photograph captured a pause, a woman mid-laugh, a child reaching for something unseen, an old man staring out a rainy window. It wasn't about what people were doing. It was about what they were feeling in the space between. I used to think photography was about timing, Michael whispered as we moved from frame to frame. And now? I asked. Now I think it's about presence. You have to be still enough to notice what matters. I nodded, the words settling somewhere deep inside me. At the final photo, we lingered. A woman stood alone in a kitchen, morning light spilling across her back. Her face wasn't visible. But there was something about the way she stood, like she was waiting for something, or maybe just remembering what it felt like to wait. That used to be me, I said softly. Michael glanced at me, then back at the photo. And now? I don't know. Maybe I'm still learning to stand in the light again. We walked out without buying anything, but the images stayed with us, like fingerprints on glass, barely there but undeniable. That night, I kept the window open again. Not for nostalgia, not for him, but for the air and the breeze and the part of me that was slowly learning how to live without armor. And maybe, just maybe, how to love again without forgetting the cost of breaking. Chapter 16. The apology I didn't expect. It came on a Tuesday. No reason for the day to matter, just another slot on the calendar. But sometimes the universe chooses the most ordinary moments to unfold the most extraordinary truths. He showed up at my door. No call, no warning. I opened it, surprised but not startled. He wasn't holding flowers or gifts, just a folded piece of paper and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept much. I wrote you something, he said. I stepped aside to let him in. He sat on the edge of the couch like he didn't know if he was staying or just passing through. I didn't want to text this, he said, unfolding the paper. And I didn't trust myself to say it right unless I wrote it down. I nodded and waited. He cleared his throat, then read. I used to think sorry was a weak word, like it couldn't fix anything, so why say it? But now I know that sometimes sorry isn't meant to fix. Sometimes it's just the start of showing that you finally understand. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed someone steady. I'm sorry I let silence grow between us until it drowned everything. I'm sorry for making you feel like you had to carry both of us. You didn't deserve that weight. You deserve to be seen, heard, and chosen every single day. And I'm sorry that it took losing you to see it. By the time he finished, he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the floor like it might break beneath him. I didn't cry. I didn't rush into his arms. I just sat beside him and let the silence fill the space. Not with discomfort, but with something else. Maybe understanding. Maybe closure. Maybe the fragile beginning of something kinder. You know, I said finally, the thing I wanted most wasn't the apology. He looked up, confused. It was the awareness, I continued, and you just gave me that. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. So, what now? I don't know, I said honestly. We're not who we were, and maybe we shouldn't be, he nodded. But maybe we can be something new. Maybe. Not promises, just possibilities. That night, I tucked the letter into the back of the same box labeled Us, not to hide it, but because it belonged to the journey. And every journey deserves its turning point. Chapter 17, Soft Mornings, Clearer Skies. It didn't happen all at once. Healing never does. But the next morning, I woke up lighter. Not euphoric, not completely whole, just lighter. Like the heaviness I'd been carrying had shifted enough for me to breathe without effort. I made 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. Out of habit? Maybe. Or maybe hope. Michael didn't come over that day. And that was okay. We had crossed a boundary not back into what we were, but forward into a space where grace lived, where truths could be said without accusation, and apologies could exist without strings. I went for a walk. It had rained the night before, and the streets still smelled like damp pavement and promise. Children were playing near the fountain downtown, their laughter unfiltered and alive. I paused to watch them, remembering how laughter once came easily between us too, and maybe I thought it could again, if we nurtured it, like a flame in the wind. Later that evening, he called. "Hey," he said. His voice was softer these days, like he was trying not to disrupt the fragile peace between us. "Hey," I replied, leaning against the kitchen counter. The same one he used to lean on while stealing bites of whatever I was cooking. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What was the moment you knew we were breaking?" I hesitated. It was such a raw question, and such a careful one. "When I started apologizing for needing you," I said, "when my requests for connection began to feel like burdens." He was quiet on the other end. "I remember," he finally said. "I thought I was being respectful, giving you space, but I see now I was really retreating." We didn't talk long after that, but it was enough. Every word felt like a stone laid down between us, building a new path. Not one that led backward, but one we could walk side by side, even if it was unfamiliar. That night, I opened the window again and lit a candle on the sill. Not as a symbol, just a gentle reminder that I was still here, alive, learning, becoming. And that sometimes even the softest mornings are proof that storms can pass, and skies, eventually, do clear. Chapter 18, Sidewalk Conversations. Somewhere between avoiding and confronting, we found conversation. Not the kind we used to have, rushed, half-listened to between texts and deadlines, but real, deliberate sidewalk conversations. We met outside the used bookstore on 5th Street. It had been years since we'd been inside together, but it was where we'd once bought a battered copy of Wuthering Heights that still had our scribbles in the margins. We never finished reading it aloud, but I still knew exactly where we'd stopped. He stood under the awning, hands in his coat pockets. "You still remember this place?" "I never forgot it," I said. We didn't go inside. Instead, we walked, slowly, side by side. It was strange how easy it felt. Like the years between then and now folded in on themselves, shrinking into something that no longer weighed as heavily as it used to. "I've been in therapy," he said as we reached the corner. "It's new. A few months." I looked over. "Really?" He nodded. "I needed to learn how to stop performing love and start practicing it." That stopped me, because it wasn't something he would have said back then. Back then, love was a noun. Now he was trying to live it like a verb. "And how's that going?" He gave a quiet chuckle. "Turns out, unlearning pride takes longer than I thought. But I'm getting better at saying what I mean. At sitting with discomfort, at not blaming." "That's something," I said. "It's more than something," he replied. "It's the first time I've really tried." We passed a mural near the corner cafe. Vibrant colors wrapped around a girl releasing paper boats into a swirling blue sea. Beneath it was a quote, "Let what you lost teach you how to hold what remains." We both stopped and stared. Neither of us spoke, because that was the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Eventually, he looked at me. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd figured all this out sooner?" "All the time," I admitted. "But then I remember, we weren't ready then. Maybe we weren't even capable." He sighed. "Do you think we're capable now?" I didn't answer, because that wasn't a question for today. Today was about walking, talking, not rewriting the past, but gently holding it while daring to imagine something different ahead. And in that moment, as the breeze tugged at the hem of my coat and the mural's message echoed behind us, I realized even the most fractured sidewalk can lead somewhere whole. Chapter 19, The Birthday I Forgot. It wasn't deliberate. I didn't forget out of spite. It just slipped. For the first time in years, I forgot his birthday. The day used to be circled on every calendar I owned, accompanied by a list of plans, reservations, ideas for the perfect gift. Even during our separation, I still remembered, though I never reached out. But this year, it passed quietly. It wasn't until I saw a post from his sister that evening, a photo of him smiling over a cake surrounded by their family, that I realized what day it was. And for a moment, I froze. Was it freedom or guilt? Was forgetting a sign that I had finally moved on, or a sign I was moving too far? I sat on the couch, staring at the screen. He looked happy, or at least lighter. I didn't message him. Not at first. I wrestled with the idea all evening, wondering if a belated happy birthday would reopen a door we'd only just begun learning how to walk past without slamming shut. But eventually, I sent it. "Happy late birthday, Michael. I hope it was gentle," he replied within minutes. "It was, but hearing from you made it better. Thank you." No extra weight, no overstepping, just a kindness offered, and a kindness returned. Later that night, I poured a glass of wine and opened the old photo album we hadn't touched since the year we split. Not out of nostalgia, but to see it through new eyes. Some memories made me laugh. Others made me close the book quickly. But one photo stayed with me. A snapshot of us, laughing mid-bite at some roadside diner, faces unposed and unaware. We looked so young, so unfinished. And maybe that's what we were. But now? Now we were older. Not necessarily wiser, just more aware. And that awareness was its own gift. Maybe forgetting his birthday wasn't the failure I feared it was. Maybe it was just a sign that time moves, not to erase what was, but to soften the edges, make room for what might still be, even if it's nothing more than peace. Chapter 20, when he said my name differently. Names carry weight, especially when spoken by someone who used to love you, or maybe still does, in some quiet corner of themselves. It was late afternoon when he stopped by. Not planned, not dramatic, just a soft knock on the door and his familiar shape in the fading light. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, holding a paper bag from the bakery down the street. "Thought you might like the lemon scones." I let him in. He moved carefully through the space, like someone entering a museum of memories. Respectful, unsure of what he was allowed to touch. We sat across from each other at the table, the same one we used to argue at, the same one we used to dream around. We talked about nothing. And then everything. And somewhere in the middle of a story about his niece learning to ride a bike, he said my name. Not like a label, not like punctuation. He said it like it meant something. Claire, just that. Soft, measured, almost reverent. I paused, because in that one word I heard it all. The regret, the recognition, the quiet plea for forgiveness he was still too proud to say aloud. He noticed. "Sorry, was that weird?" I shook my head. "No, just rare." He smiled, eyes crinkling at the edges. "I used to say your name like it belonged to me. I don't want to do that anymore." "And how do you say it now?" He met my eyes. "Like I'm grateful you ever let me say it at all." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full, brimming with all the things that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. I didn't reach for his hand. He didn't ask to stay longer. We just sat, two people rebuilding something. Not the past, not the romance, but maybe a kind of grace. The kind that comes when you finally start seeing each other clearly. As he stood to leave, he turned back at the door. "Claire," he said again, smiling softly. This time, I smiled too. Because sometimes, the way someone says your name tells you everything you need to know. And in that moment, I knew. Whatever we were becoming, it was no longer built on ruin. Chapter 21, a Sunday without expectations. It had been months since we fell into any sort of rhythm. Yet somehow, that Sunday felt like old music playing through new speakers. The morning air was crisp, golden sunlight spilling across the kitchen tiles like it had missed us. I hadn't invited him over, not formally. But he'd texted the night before. Would it be okay if I stopped by with coffee? No reasons, no labels, just Sunday. I almost said no, but I didn't. He arrived just after 10, coffee in one hand, a paper bag of warm croissants in the other, and a book tucked under his arm. An old copy of The Little Prince, the one we'd once gifted each other and then both lost in the move-out shuffle. "I found it at a thrift shop," he said, placing it gently on the table. "Thought it deserved a second chance." And we didn't talk much at first, just moved around the kitchen quietly, like two people who remembered how to share space without stepping on each other's silence. I poured orange juice. He buttered croissants. The kind of domestic dance that used to be routine, now sacred in its simplicity. As we ate, we swapped stories. Work, family, the show he'd binged recently that reminded him of me. Nothing heavy. Nothing hidden. Just the soft passing of conversation, like a breeze that doesn't demand to be noticed. At some point, I laughed. Not the polite kind, but a real one. And I caught him staring at me, the way someone might look at a memory they thought they'd never relive. "What?" I asked, self-conscious. He shook his head slowly. "You laugh differently now." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that good or bad?" "It's beautiful," he said. "It sounds like you're finally laughing for yourself." We spent hours like that. No declarations, like no revisiting past wreckage. Just two people in a moment they didn't expect to find comfort in. When he left, there was no promise of what came next. No pressure to define what that Sunday meant. Just a hug that lingered. And a truth that settled gently between us. Maybe healing isn't loud. Maybe it looks like a quiet Sunday morning. Maybe it's croissants and coffee. Maybe it's laughing differently and being seen for it. 22, where the silence felt safe. It was never the shouting that broke us. It was the silence. The cold stretches of time when neither of us spoke, not out of peace, but out of punishment. Back then, silence was a weapon, a barricade, a refusal to reach across the growing void between us. But now it felt different. This silence, the one we found ourselves in that rainy Tuesday afternoon, wasn't empty. It was calm, present, comfortable, even. He was sitting on the floor beside my bookshelf, flipping through old travel guides and photo albums, his back leaned casually against the armchair he used to call his. I was curled up on the couch, book in hand, eyes mostly pretending to read while I watched him from the corner of my gaze. Outside, the rain tapped against the windows like an old friend stopping by just to say it remembered us. We hadn't said much in the last hour, but I didn't need him to speak. His presence was enough. At one point, he looked up and caught me watching him. "What?" he asked with a soft smile. I shrugged. "Nothing. Just, it's nice. This. All of it." He nodded, closing the book in his hands. "Yeah, it is. There was a time when being in the same room without conversation would have driven me mad. When I would have filled the air with questions or critiques or nervous chatter. I used to think love needed to be loud to be real. But maybe that was just fear in disguise. Now I found comfort in the quiet, in the unspoken, in the simple fact that we could exist together, without explanation, without tension, and still feel whole." He stood and stretched, glancing toward the kitchen. "You want tea?" I nodded, and he moved with the ease of someone who remembered where everything was, yet still paused before opening a cabinet, silently asking for permission with a glance. I smiled and nodded again. "Yes, it's okay. You're allowed." He returned with 2 mugs and placed mine gently on the side table next to me. Then, instead of returning to the floor, he sat on the opposite end of the couch, not too close, but close enough. We sipped in silence. And for the first time, I realized that maybe this was a kind of intimacy I'd never understood before. One built not on fireworks or confessions, but on being allowed to breathe together in the stillness. Where silence didn't mean distance. It meant trust, and peace, and safety. Chapter 23, Almost Again. There's a strange ache in the word almost. A longing that never fully dies, even when you think you've moved past it. We were standing on a bridge downtown, the kind that curved softly over the river and gave way to a perfect view of the city lights. It wasn't planned. We'd bumped into each other earlier that day at the farmer's market. Me picking out apples, him holding a small bag of fresh basil and bread. "Same taste in Sundays?" he joked. "Seems like it," I'd replied, amused but not surprised. We ended up walking together, one booth to the next, conversations meandering from safe to sentimental. It was easy, dangerously so. And somehow, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, we found ourselves here, on this bridge, with the city at our backs and the weight of the past between us. I leaned against the railing, fuzzy, staring down at the water. "Do you ever think about what we almost were?" He didn't answer right away. I could feel him beside me, hands in the pockets of his coat, shoulders rising and falling with a breath he didn't want to release too loudly. "Every day," he said eventually. The honesty in his voice made me look at him. He met my eyes. "But I think about what we could still be even more." That scared me. It stirred something deep, something fragile and tender that I'd spent months carefully folding away. Not because it was gone, but because it was safer that way. "We broke each other," I whispered, not accusing, just stating the truth. "And we've been trying to unbreak ourselves since," he said gently. "Maybe that's what makes it different now." For a moment, we just stood there, neither pushing forward nor stepping back, caught in the echo of a choice neither of us knew how to make. "I'm not asking to go back," he added, voice quieter than the wind. "I'm asking if maybe we could go forward. Differently." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. But when his fingers brushed against mine on the railing, I didn't move away, and that felt like an answer of its own. Chapter 24, The Space Between Forgiveness and Love. There's a fragile place between forgiveness and love. A quiet, trembling space where hope begins to breathe again. We were navigating that space with caution, like tiptoeing through the remnants of a once broken home, touching walls gently to test if they still held. A week had passed since the bridge. Nothing official had changed between us. No grand declarations, no labels. Just a softness. More calls, a few meals shared, a shared playlist sent in the middle of the night. I caught myself humming to it while folding laundry and had to smile at the absurdity, how simple things could feel so new again. He'd invited me to the art gallery that Friday. "Not a date," he said. "Just something we used to love." And we had. I remembered the quiet we used to share there, the unspoken commentary in our glances, the way he'd stand slightly behind me so I'd lean back just a little, instinctively drawing him in. Now we stood side by side in a corner of the exhibit, staring at a painting that looked like storm clouds cracked open over a field of golden wheat. Beautiful. Moody. Full of contradiction. "You know," he said after a long silence, "I used to hate how we fell apart." I didn't look at him. I let the painting absorb my stare. "Me too." But lately, I've been thinking, maybe we had to fall. Maybe we had to unlearn who we thought we were so we could meet again like this, without all the noise. I finally looked at him. His eyes weren't searching mine for confirmation or comfort. He was just there, steady. "I don't know what this is," I admitted, "or what it's becoming." He nodded. "Me neither. But I'm not afraid of it anymore," I said. His smile was soft, grateful. "That's enough for me." We walked through the rest of the gallery without touching, without forcing anything. It was enough just to be near, to breathe the same air, to wonder, maybe for the first time, if we were capable of building something stronger, not from the ashes of what we were, but from the strength of what we'd learned. Later that night, when he dropped me off, he didn't ask to come in. He didn't linger too long. Just a hug, a long, careful hug that said more than words ever could. And in that embrace, I felt it. We were still healing, still growing, but we were no longer standing still. We were stepping, slowly, bravely, through the space between forgiveness and love. Chapter 25, The Way Back Isn't Backward. There was no ceremony to it, no big kiss in the rain, no perfectly timed confession under the stars. Just two people learning, step by step, how to carry each other again, differently, better. It was a Sunday morning, the kind that started slow with golden light spilling through the blinds. I was making pancakes, humming to a song he'd sent me 2 nights ago. He walked in wearing the sweatshirt he'd left behind years ago, the one I'd kept tucked in the back of my closet through every season, through every silence. We didn't speak at first. The music filled the space between us. Then, he leaned against the counter and said, "You know, I don't think we ever really stopped loving each other." I paused, flipping the pancake with a half smile. "I think we just forgot how." He nodded, eyes soft. "I don't want to forget again." There it was. No kneeling, no bouquet, no begging, just truth. I turned off the stove and faced him fully. "Then we don't. Not a promise, not a restart, but a continuation, written in present tense, not in fear of the past or fantasy of the future." We sat down with syrup and coffee and mismatched mugs, talked about small things, about how the neighbors kept sneaking into the yard, about maybe repainting the living room. About nothing, really, and everything. I watched him laugh at his own joke, head tilted, eyes crinkling at the edges like they used to. Only this time, I wasn't looking for signs. I wasn't bracing for impact. I was here, and so was he. The road back to each other hadn't been smooth. It had been jagged and painful. littered with regret and reflection. But we hadn't gone backward. We'd forged something new, something shaped by ruin but resolved in grace. Sometimes love isn't about staying. Sometimes it's about coming back when it matters, when it's real, when it's right, when both people have done the work. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. This time I didn't hesitate, and just like that, we began. Not again, but anew.